Ladies and gentlemen, well, that worked well. Oi! Gosh, you're a rowdy lot. What was in that afternoon tea? And I understand it's really easy to be pretty hyped up at this stage after what's been a pretty amazing day and shaping up to be just as amazing for the last sessions. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our final formal session on what's been an amazing conference day. It's with the greatest of pleasure that I get to announce that PLWA has the great privilege of sponsoring Traci and her attendance at our conference today. And so thank you very much to Traci for coming such a long way to speak to us this afternoon. So I'd like to introduce our final presenter this afternoon. And Traci Lesneski is the Principal and Head of Interiors at MSR Design, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Traci has led dozens of library projects across the United States in her 20 plus years designing libraries and spaces for learning. Obviously you started at the age of 4. Obviously a very talented child, Traci. Her belief that smartly designed buildings improve lives ensures that her library designs are beautiful, functional, and sustainable. Recent examples of her work include the award-winning dramatic reimagination of the Madison Central Library in Wisconsin. We're waiting for an invitation to visit that one. And transformation of the Tulsa City County Library's Central Library in Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. Traci speaks regularly at library conferences and is the author of numerous articles and papers about library design. Traci is currently chair of the American Library Association's section that deals with architecture of public libraries, and she is secretary of the International IFLA's Library Building and Equipment Section Standing Committee. Man, that's a very impressive bunch of roles you have there. So Traci's going to share with us this afternoon her session, which is entitled The Generative Library, Designing for Human Wellbeing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to welcome Traci to the podium to make her presentation. Thank you.
Right, so no pressure after all of those great people today, I can't believe. We were at the last session already. It's gone flying by. Thank you, PLWA, for inviting me and for bringing me here. It's been a pleasure, and I have to echo what Sergio said this morning, that the welcome from the committee has been tremendous. I don't think I've ever felt so at home and so welcomed when I've come to speak somewhere. So thank you, everybody, for that. That's been wonderful. Just to give you a little visual of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and where I spend a lot of my time when I'm not traveling around and talking to people like you. This is where our home is, at Mill City in Minneapolis, overlooking the Mississippi River. But I just want to dive right in because I have a lot to share, and I think everybody's keen to get to the wine as soon as possible. So I don't want to hold up. So I'm going to talk about designing to support human well-being. And that sounds like a pretty simple, intuitive, and kind of like, of course, why wouldn't all of our buildings support human well-being as an idea, but actually it doesn't happen very much, if at all. And part of the reason for that traces back to recent architectural history. And I'm not trying to throw Le Corbusier under the bus. He's a very highly esteemed and lauded architect from early 20th century. But this is when many advances were made in building technology and in construction practice, a lot of experimentation with new materials, things like glass, and steel that weren't used very much yet in construction, and architects kind of went a little crazy with it. And Corbusier said at one point in 1923, a house is a machine for living in. And everybody kind of glommed onto that idea as architecture being a machine. And unfortunately, that had kind of a bad impact on human well-being. The idea of building as a machine meant that architecture was very efficient, very streamlined, very innovative, but usually very disconnected from nature and kind of austere and taut, sometimes treated as a little precious object sitting in the middle of an urban setting or in the middle of a field like you see here. And while he didn't maybe intend it, Corbu's idea of building as a machine really got taken to heart. So in the mid-20th century, the developing materials and technologies like the aluminum, the glass, and rubber and things were used heavily, and advances were also made at the same time in lighting and heating and conditioning the air of buildings. This was lauded as a way of making buildings more consistent, the interior environment more consistent. Windows weren't necessary anymore for daylight or fresh air, and so there you could more heavily control what that building interior felt like. But what that did was seal us all off from nature, which is not good for us. And so a lot of the buildings that were built, especially civic buildings like libraries, they were machines. They were very efficient and they were very spare, but like I said, disconnected from the things that humans actually really need at our kind of gut level, instinctual level, to feel a sense of well-being. And well-being is important for us to be able to perform at our best and do our best thinking. So many buildings had very few windows. You've probably been in a building like this. Maybe your library is like this, or where you went to school is like this. This is Berkeley Library in Dublin. It was thought at the time that views outside actually would harm concentration, and it was better to keep people focused internally. But like I said, it had a very bad impact on people. Meanwhile, climate disruption and global warming finally got the architecture profession's attention, and we now know that of all the man-made reasons for climate disruption, producing electricity and heat is the largest at 25% of global emissions. And as we came to understand more about what our way of life meant for our planet, many things changed, including how we built. So there's been a major emphasis for a couple of decades about sustainable design. I'm sure you've all heard of sustainable design. But what sustaining means is maintaining. And maintaining, if we maintain the status quo, scientists have been telling us quite a long time now about this 2 degrees Celsius milestone that's looming. If we maintain the way that we live now and the way that we build now and the way that we commute, we'll reach that 2 degrees already in 8 years, only 8 years from now. So we can't maintain anymore. We can't just sustain. We need to actually be generative and give back to the earth. And so we have to just shift our minds about how we live, but also how we build. And so in contrast to the idea of a building as a machine, generative buildings are productive and integrated entities in their ecosystem. They give back to the earth by replenishing aquifers. They eliminate waste by using it as a resource. They support their ecosystems, living beings like birds and insects and planets, and yes, humans as well. And generative buildings are places where humans can thrive. They emulate a forest, which is why you see this lush forest on the screen here. So they're beautiful, but they're rooted in place. They shelter multitudes of organisms, and they manage to get all their required energy from the sun, all the required water from the sky, and they turn waste into a resource, as I said. So sustainable architecture started us on this path to making better places for the earth with kind of a pleasant side effect of, oh, it's also good for humans. Generative architecture means deliberately making better places for people, because we need to be rejuvenated, especially if we're going to save the earth, right? So a focus on daylight harvesting means natural light for people, views to the exterior, which are great. A focus on water conservation means that there's more water available to us. Using building materials that are healthy and put less toxins into our body, good for people, and so on. So as my profession finally had that light bulb moment, we realized that all these generative goals support well-being. And why is designing for well-being important? Well, if you're from Australia or the UK or Canada or the US, you spend on average 90% of your day inside. That means we spend about 2.5 hours every day outside. How many people manage to get 2.5 hours outside today? Not one, right? But you're saying, oh, sure, I was at a conference, that's not fair. Tomorrow I'll be outside all day long. Sure, that's fair enough, fair enough. But now take your age, you don't have to say it, just think your age, and multiply it by 0.9. And now, to save you the trouble of finding your app, there you go. I've got, yeah, right? If you're 45, say, you've spent 40 years of your life inside. It's a little depressing, isn't it? If you're 58, you've spent 52 years inside. It's crazy. So that changes your perspective a little, or at least it changed mine. The majority of humans spend their lives inside. 3/4 of children in the UK spend less time outside than prison inmates do, which is astonishing. So that's not only crazy, but for the most of human history, that wasn't the case. We evolved outside. We were much more active. We were outside. We were using our eyes in different ways than we do now. We were using our bodies a lot more. So given all that, shouldn't the places that we spend 90% of our lives be designed with human well-being in mind? I think they should. And yet, by and large, most of them, not so much. Who thinks this is a familiar image? Anybody? Yeah, right? This is, sadly, this is what a lot of people spend their workday in. This is actually from the highly lauded city of Madison, Wisconsin. This is the city offices. People scramble to work for the city of Madison. They're a progressive city. They're doing amazing things. They're kind of charting the way for mid-tier cities in the US. It's considered lucrative to work here. This is not taken from the 70s or 80s. This is a year ago, which is sad, and definitely not supporting well-being. So what I want to talk about for the rest of this time is designing for well-being. Because if you keep that in mind, people will be more productive and they'll be happier. They'll be able to focus. And, you know, buildings that support well-being have been proven that they help us heal faster when we're sick. And so there's a measurable aspect as well as the kind of touchy-feely, feel-good side of it's just good for our souls, but it is good for our souls. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the first piece of that pie was the emotional side of well-being, which is designing to support a sense of community, creating inclusive places and providing some cues to our subconscious that we're in a safe place. And I was talking a little bit at the break about what I mean by safe place, which is places that make us feel settled and ready to learn or to absorb or to be conversational with our community members. It's not about security so much, although that is a really important part of library design. It's really about creating a place that makes us feel at our core and at our gut, ready to do what it is we came to the building to do. And humans are are inherently social people or species. We thrive on connections to community, and our lifestyle is actually used to support that need pretty well. We could catch up with our neighbors while they were sitting on their porch, maybe. We could chat while waiting online at the bank, while shopping at the market, at the local record shop, that sort of thing. And these ordinary moments helped connect us to each other. It was kind of a glue that kept us feeling as part of a community. Did you know that there's a World Happiness Report? There is actually a World Happiness Report. It's pretty fabulous. Who else reads it besides me? I'm kind of a geek and I read that sort of thing. Yeah. So one of the findings of the 2017 report was that having social support plays a direct role in happiness. In fact, if as little as 10% more of a country's citizens report just having one person to count on in a time of need, it increases the happiness index of that entire country as much as doubling GDP would do, which is amazing if you think about that. Just somebody saying they have a connection with one person. So imagine how much of an impact deeper social connections would have. And Allison's shared some really amazing stories about how those connections are being deepened by the programming that you're running. It was really heartwarming to read all about those or hear about those things. So community is critical to well-being, and we're losing the places to build that into our lives anymore. When was the last time you went physically to the bank anymore? People are ordering more things online. There's just a lot of things that are keeping us from bumping into one another and creating those social connections. So I think the library is that place now, and can be and should be that place. Libraries are workplaces, certainly, for you and your staff, and they're civic meeting places already. They're homework hubs, they're co-working offices and discovery centers and such, but they also need to be places where people just relax and play and socialize and feel like it's okay to do that. And that happens more and more and more now, but it needs to really be embraced, I think, and so it becomes the place for the everyday. It's not a destination for once a week, maybe. It's where you stop by like you were going to the pub after work or something. Commonplace and ordinary moments, because when you have that tying you together as a community, then it makes the harder conversations much easier, because there's a level of trust that's been built. You talked to Ellison about the neighbors that were bouncing the ball on the wall, for example. That doesn't happen if you know your neighbor. Well, the same thing with some of the misunderstandings that are happening, at least in my country, lately. And so if we just had a little bit better understanding of who we were and had a place to be friends, that would be, I think, a really good evolution. And so this is, of course, in Amsterdam, kind of famous because it was one of the first places to have a bar in the library and serve alcohol. I think it was brilliant. That is exactly what I think libraries need to do. And now, why don't I show you, again with the wine, right? It's the end of the day. So why I have toilet rooms then. We go from a bar to the toilet. Well, there's kind of a tie there, a biological tie, right? That wasn't intended, actually. So designing for inclusion means that a building can be used by as many people as possible. So that part of that community building means that everybody feels welcome. And there's some principles of inclusive design, and I'll rattle them off really quick to you because I think they also describe a library. So the principles for inclusive design, which have been well published, are being inclusive, being responsive, being flexible, so people can use you in different ways, being convenient, being accommodating, being welcoming. Doesn't that sound like a library? I thought when I read it, that's absolutely libraries. And why I have a toilet room on the screen, though, is because something that usually makes a building feel more inclusive to one group makes it feel better for everybody. When in the US, when the American with Disabilities Act came online, that was about when I was starting my career. No, I was not 4. I was a little bit older than that. That was in the early 90s, and a lot of the older professionals in my profession were really complaining about providing universal access in buildings and what a pain it was, and now we have to pay attention to all these rules. And in the end, though, what we realized was that all of our customers that were using any of our buildings all appreciated those things. It's not just one segment that benefits when you think about opening the doors and being more inclusive. And so the toilet rooms, back to those. I have a Korean colleague who told me that he felt alienated in the US because bathroom stalls didn't reach the floor. He didn't feel like it was his home until he came to, our office happens to have individual toilet rooms. And he said, I felt finally like there was somebody here that was welcoming me. I thought, my gosh, I've never thought about toilet rooms that way before. Usually the stall door is off the floor because it's easier to clean, and nobody really thought about the human side of that. It was all about what was easy to maintain. And so I just thought that was kind of a nice idea to think about what, if it's not hurting somebody else, it's maybe a better thing to do. But if it is hurting somebody, don't do it, maybe. Think about what the human impact is first. And so you can't have an inclusive library if people won't come to your building in the first place, and they won't stay and have those small talk moments, kind of everyday, ordinary moments, if the building doesn't feel like it's created for people. And key is a first impression, so that entry experience has to be really well done. And when we walk into a building and we're confused about where to go, our blood pressure actually goes up. Our anxiety level rises, and then we kind of shut down a little bit and we can't figure out where to go. So one of the important things to think about is that first impression that your customer has. And I talked about that quite a bit yesterday in the 10 Steps workshop, which, by the way, what amazing energy you all have. It is incredible how much engagement was in that room yesterday and all day today and out here in the coffee thing. So thank you for that. That's been really tremendous. I'm going to take that back to my US colleagues and tell them all about how great Aussie librarians are. So when you come into this library, would you feel clear about where to go and what to do? You would maybe finally pick out the huge text that says reference, and everybody would probably go there, right? How do I use this building? I'm gonna go there because there's a person there, and that's not what they wanted to be doing, right? So maybe having a little bit more clarity and a little less visual clutter would help somebody to feel more welcomed and feel a connection and how to get through the building. So I talked about this yesterday as well, so I apologize to those who were in the workshop, but visual variety is something that I can't understate, or overstate rather. So think about the typical conference center room. Thank goodness this is not one of these rooms. This is actually a very nice building that we're having this conference in. But a lot of us have been in one of these, right? And they're kind of difficult to be in all day. Imagine if we were having today's sessions in this room all day long. We would all be like this. It's because of the lack of visual variety, among other things. There might be bad HVAC too, but there needs to be some sort of variety in what we see in a space because we grew up as a species in nature. And consider the difference between that, or previous slide to this. Even though most of this is green and brown, look at all the different greens and different browns and the way that daylight changes what you're seeing here and how the path looks different and has some variety to it. We need this. This is a basic human need that we have to have some visual variety to feel a connection to the place where we are. And yet most libraries don't have that, do they? I'm pleased to say that Perth's new library certainly has it, and it was such a joy to go through it. Or the libraries that Patty was showing us also this morning, a lot of wonderful architecture and visual variety present in those. The last aspect of emotional well-being that I want to talk about is this sense of personal safety that I mentioned before, as relates to a concept called prospect and refuge. Does anybody know, besides the people who were here yesterday, does anybody know about prospect and refuge? So think about a restaurant that offers booths and tables. So there's booths around the edge and tables down the middle. Where do most people want to sit? Where do you want to sit? In the table. Raise your hand if you want to sit in the table. One person, two, just a handful of people who want to sit in the table. Who wants to sit in the booth? Yeah, that's pretty typical. Overwhelmingly, people choose the booth. And the reason for that is we don't like people sneaking up behind us. We like a little bit of an enclosure. We like to kind of see the field a little bit, and that's called refuge. We like that idea of having just a little bit of shelter around us. Now, another example of eating, not that we haven't had enough tea and everything else, but in like a airport mall food court, when there's just a sea of tables, and you've got your tray, and you're walking around, and you're walking around, and you're walking around, and you can't find a place to sit because nothing feels comfortable, but then you finally spy the trash bin, and you're like, ooh, I'll just kind of sidle up next to the trash bin. There's a little bit of shelter there, or a column, or a little knee wall, a little short wall or something. That need for us to back our backs up against something and then see the rest of the field, that's prospect. We need that as well. That's something that's kind of cooked into our DNA. And so we need to provide those kinds of opportunities as best we can in our buildings so that people can have those opportunities. And one way of doing that, of course, is carving out a little architectural niche like you see in this image. Notice nobody is sitting in those two chairs with the back to the aisle. Not a one. Interesting, right? This guy has his back to the aisle, but the chair is higher, so he feels like he's got that shelter. So furnishings can also give you that prospect and refuge effect. Okay, physical well-being. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these. There's not enough time. We'd be here till 7, and then wine would be gone, and everybody would be angry with me, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to pick off a couple of these that I don't think get very much conversation out there yet. I think you'll start hearing about these few things a lot now if you haven't yet. And one is healthy building materials. I'm sorry to tell you, and probably even this building as well, most materials that go into making a building, from the structure to the roof to the enclosure to the furniture to the finishes, are very unhealthy for us. They have toxins in them that are really not good for us. So everybody wants to stand up now, right? You're going to start squiggling. They affect the air quality of the building. They contribute to asthma, birth defects. They compromise our immune systems. And there's only just the beginnings of research about all the things that we've been essentially polluting ourselves with all these years, especially when we're nice and buttoned up in those air-conditioned buildings. And so the Living Futures Institute, which is what gave birth to the Living Building Challenge. Does everybody know the Living Building Challenge, which is creating buildings that are more generative and more part of a system? That's helping us understand what all those toxins are and how to identify them in the products. However, the product manufacturers haven't caught up with that yet. So there's not very many products online yet. And the reason I'm talking about this now is not to scare everybody. That's not at all my intent. What my hope is that when you are embarking on a building project, you help us move the industry forward by demanding healthy materials, because only when the product manufacturers start to hear that there's a demand for it will that start to change. So we're all doing our little bits to do what we can, but if every one of you did this and told 10 people and 10 people, like they always say, the whole network happens, we'll make progress a lot faster. And I think all of our bodies will thank us for it. Okay, any guesses for what the most often complained about aspect of a building is? Yeah, air conditioning, yes. Thermal comfort is by far either being too hot or being too cold. It's the thing that people complain about the most, and it disrupts our concentration, it reduces our productivity. Anybody who feels cold today? Raise your hand. Yeah, it's cold in here. How about in your workplace, just on a daily basis? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a really good reason that we feel cold. And I'm going to let you stand up and wiggle around and get warm in just a second. But there's a study that just came out in 2016 that tells us that the temperatures in many buildings are based on a formula that was developed in the 1960s that uses the resting metabolic rate of a 154-pound, 40-year-old man. Raise your hand if you are a 154-pound, 40-year-old man. Nobody? Oh, one. We have one. One. So this building was built for you. Yes, well done, well done. So in addition to that it's very specifically that demographic that was being targeted, women have lower metabolic rates than men and tend to be colder. Maybe you know this, just anecdotally. But here we are, half a century or more later, and we're still using those same set points. And I'm pretty sure that most buildings are used by more than 150-pound, 40-year-old men. And so people are wrapping themselves up in blankets. People sometimes are wearing those fingerless gloves so they can still type but keep warm. It's crazy. And so I think just keeping in mind that the set points can go up, and actually there's been some studies that show productivity goes up when the heat goes up, even for the 154-pound, 40-year-old men. For some reason, some of my notes aren't showing up here. I had the actual degrees for you, and I can't see them, so I'll just wing it and say it is better if it's warmer. All right, another aspect of physical well-being is getting people to move more. We sit too much. Your library customers sit too much, but it's not okay to just stand all day either, so the sit-to-stand desks are great, but it's not enough to stand all day or sit all day. You have to be moving around. And so, to that end, everybody gets to stand up now. I don't have music for this, so we're going to have to help me because I do not sing. So, does everybody know the HokeyPokey? I'm so glad, because you speak to an international audience and you think, oh my God, maybe they don't know the HokeyPokey, and maybe they think I've put something really horrible on the screen just now. I don't know. But so, ready? We're just going to do one little one. We're going to do the arms, left arm and then right arm. Ready? Okay. You put your left arm in. You put your left arm out. put your left arm in, and you shake it all about. You do the, come on, you gotta turn, and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. Woo, yeah. All right, maybe that's enough. Should we do one more, or are you good? One more. Okay, sorry, we've got to get going. All right, thank you for that. Hopefully that got you warmed up just a little bit. So, aside from song and dance, there's a lot of other things that you guys can do to get people to move more. We talked about the sit-to-stand desks that you're seeing here already. But, you know, just a few minutes a day actually help reap great benefits like increased focus and improved mood. Look at everybody's smiling now. Just that tiny little bit of HokeyPokey. So another way to get your staff and customers to move more is by just making it fun. And you don't have to do that by singing. The Science Museum of Minnesota had a musical Stair put in when they did their new building, which was so much fun. And every time I went there with my kids, in fact, they would run up and down, up and down, up and down, and they would do that stair 100 times and not even think about the fact that they were climbing a stair because it was just great. And Volkswagen, does anybody know this campaign that Volkswagen did? I'm going to play a little bit of the video here. I hope you don't mind. Is there anybody who hasn't seen this yet? Oh, good. Okay. So they experimented with a piano stair to see if it would encourage people to use the stair instead of the adjacent escalator. And guess what? So fun. 66% of people used the stairs instead of the escalator. I think that's just so fantastic. And if you haven't stumbled across it yet, there's a website called letsmovelibraries.org, capturing ideas from all around the world on a cool visual map, interactive map that you can then pull out what those stories are about how libraries all around the world are helping to get people moving more. So I urge you to check that out. Okay, so healthy lighting is also critical to physical well-being in addition to getting people moving. And by healthy lighting, I mean varied and diffuse light like we would find in nature. Unvaried light, like that even kind of blast that we see in a lot of libraries and a lot of civic buildings in general, or office buildings for that matter, they actually hurt our eyes. They strain our eyes, which hurts well-being, obviously. And it can actually lead to a low-level sensory deprivation, which sounds really awful, doesn't it? But in general, what that means is it makes us irritable, and it impairs our thinking, and it can even cause depression for some people. So lighting variability is really, really important. So the human-centric approach to lighting would be to use a tiered approach like you're seeing in the slide here, which is mixing kind of an overall ambient light with daylight and task light and accent lighting, instead of just flooding the room like you often see. It's okay to have shadows. Our eyes actually see better with shadows. Our brains translate what we see into 3 dimensions, and when everything is flat and even, it's harder for our brains to interpret what we're seeing, which makes us work harder, which makes our eyes work harder. And so, again, think of nature and that nature walk, and how varied and textural nature really is. That's what we need in our buildings for us to feel good and for well-being. Another part of daylight that's important is letting it show us where we are in the day. So marking time and marking the passage of time and being in tune with that. I'm sure everybody has heard about how it helps us sleep better when we're connected to the rhythms of the sun. And there's many other really great physical benefits, including lower blood pressure, better communication with our colleagues. Who couldn't use that, right? People laugh more when they have access to daylight and can tell when the day is changing. Nurses are nicer to their patients. That's got to be good. And it actually helps people exercise more when you're exposed to daylight. So I like to say this a lot to my clients, that daylight is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And they will often take that back to their higher ups and say, look, I need windows because daylight is, Traci said, daylight is not a luxury. And it's true, it's very true, we need it, it's a basic thing. But daylight is just one part of the natural world that's key to well-being. It turns out that smelling and hearing and being in nature is also critical to us. So water and plants, which have been key to our survival for thousands of years, have a really positive effect on us, not surprisingly, right? And a 15-minute walk in the woods actually changes our physiology. There's been a couple of studies about this, and the more recent one took 87 people and had them stroll in different forests and had 87 people walking through city centers, and then compared the two and found that the people who walked through the forest showed 16% decrease in the stress hormone cortisol, a 2% drop in blood pressure, and a 4% drop in heart rate. And I'm wondering if maybe it's that our bodies relax when we're in nature because that's where we evolved, right? And when we're in the city, they're like, I don't know what a city is. This isn't where I grew up. So maybe there's just something basic about our DNA cooked into that. And this, to me, is what the genius is of the High Line. Has anybody been on the High Line? It is really cool, isn't it? And all these people who are in Manhattan, visitors to the city, people who work there, can just pop up onto this park that's above the streets and walk around and get a few minutes of nature infused and not have to, make their way up to Central Park or any of the other pocket parks. It's just right there, weaving its way through Manhattan. It's amazing. And the nature has to be real, by the way, to have the maximum effect. You can look at a screen that's showing a nature scene, but our brain is not tricked by that. It does help better than having no nature, so a screen is better than nothing. But our brains know that, again, it's that stereoscopic way of seeing that our eyes have, and it's constantly recalibrating. So as we move and the tree is moving and it's blowing and the wind and butterflies are landing or whatever, our brain is calibrating that all the time, constantly. When it's a monitor, it's a flat image that's not doing the same thing, and our brain says immediately that's not real. It's like when, have you been in a hotel lobby and you see this beautiful bouquet of flowers, and you're like, oh my God, are those real? And you go up and you touch it and it's not, and you're like, oh my God, that's not real. And that's because our physiology, or our DNA is saying, no, we want the real deal. So it doesn't have to be a lush forest, though, like I was showing before. It doesn't have to be even an ocean view or anything lovely like you've got access to here in Western Australia. It can be a potted plant. One little silly potted plant has the same effect. It can be a tree outside, like you're seeing in this very urban library. Those trees that are way across the way, even those have the same effect. But you just have to look at it. And what's really crazy is it only takes 40 seconds to get the effect. 40 seconds of gazing at nature gives you the same effect. Isn't that crazy? So there you go. Have a potted plant in your office and all is good. But there's another health benefit to having views to nature. It's good for our eyes. We spend a lot of our day with very up-close work, right? Books or computers or smartphones or what have you. And so our eye muscles get kind of locked up into this see close mode. And we need the ability to relax them and look long distances. And actually, Australian National University just published a study about this. You probably heard it because it was in your papers a lot, about children needing to spend 3 hours a day outside to help prevent myopia, which has been like this huge, I called it an epidemic yesterday, and it felt really, I don't know, sensational to say it that way, but maybe that's the right word. There's a lot of study going on now about why daylight is good for our eyes, and they think it's because it helps it to keep the round shape. And so that's kind of an amazing thing. And the amount of light that's needed is equivalent to somebody sitting under a shady tree wearing sunglasses on a bright day, which is about 5 or 6 times higher light level than in a typical building. So you can't get it just by being in bright light inside. I guess that's the short message. As much as we love nature, we love moving nature even more. So static nature, like a potted plant or artwork that has a natural scene, it's better than no nature. But dynamic nature, like moving water or these fountains that play that you watch for hours, they actually elicit some physiological responses that are positive for us. And because it's evoking all of our senses. Even though you can't hear this now, can't you kind of hear it? And you can feel the vibration of the water hitting the pond. You can probably sort of imagine what it smells like to be standing there. Hopefully it's not after a late night when people have been sleeping there, maybe, right? That was not a nice thing to say. But I say that only because when I did this video, that was the case. So when I said smell it made me think of the wrong smell, that I was trying to get you to think of the happy smell. I'm sorry, I've ruined it now. It's all ruined. It's all ruined. But isn't it lovely to look at? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I got that far off track. Let's move on. And so, oh dear. It's also because of fractals. Nature is filled with fractals. They're in waves, they're in plant forms, they're in seashells, of course, they're in clouds. And we're hardwired to love fractals because we love nature. And this is actually a shot that I took out of the airplane on my way here this week. And I love clouds, and this is going to maybe be the only conference where porn is mentioned twice in an hour. But I'm an Instagrammer, and so I was Instagramming my cloud, and I did #cloud, and I think I was going to put a cloud, I had a P, and what popped up was cloud porn. Like, oh, all right, cloud porn it is. So there you go, little bit you didn't know maybe, or maybe you did. But fractals are entrancing to us, and Jackson Pollock's paintings are, of course, famous to have been determined to have fractals because of the way he flicked his wrist. He was actually making fractals before people even were talking about fractals. So it wasn't that he was intentionally like, I gotta do it like this because then it makes a fractal. That wasn't the case at all. It just really happened that way. And that's why his splatter paintings command $50 million or $500 million, and somebody else that's just doing this doesn't get anything for their painting. But our eyes, the reason that we like fractals in this sort of setting is because it's how our eyes work to read a painting like that. The complex patterns that are created in this kind of a splatter painting follow the way our eye moves around the painting. It's crazy. So that's part of the reason we feel like a connection to some of these things and to fractals. And by the way, this particular one, I could have chosen any of Pollock's paintings, but I chose this one because it's famous because of you guys. Did you know this? Do you know this story? Yes, okay, good, I'm so glad. But now, here's the good news. You don't need to buy a Jackson Pollock to put in your library to have fractals, right? There's a lot of ways you can do that, and one is with nature-inspired patterns. And here's an example from the Madison Library where we took a plant that grows in their region and we blew it up and repeated it in kind of a fractal-like pattern. And people comment on, these are the screens that close off the library after hours so people can still use the meeting spaces and the toilet rooms and things. And people comment on those that there's some connection that they don't understand why they like them. So that's just a simple example of bringing fractals into the building. But again, back to the moving fractals, they are amazing. We think they're like brain candy or something. So one of the reasons you sit for hours and look at a fire And you're just like, oh, fire. It's because it's fractals that are moving. So it's not only fractals, but they're moving fractals. So if there's a way to bring moving fractals into your building, try and do it. You don't have to have a fire dancer. Isn't she amazing, though? Like how she hulas that thing up and down her body without moving her arms. I don't get it. It's crazy. Okay, winding down here. Now, cognitive. So cognitive well-being, that's the third of those three bubbles. All right, so back to kind of really hard to look at interior environments. The first thing to support cognitive well-being, the ability to think and process, is to have a clutter-free environment. You guys are probably going to get tired of hearing me say that this week, but it's something that a lot of our clients struggle with because you want to pack as much in, right, into the small space that you've got to work with. But actually you might be doing your customers a disservice because they can't focus. And so I'm going to do this guy. Who sees the square? Everybody sees the square, right? Do you still see the square? Yes, and that's because our brains work really, really hard to fill in the gaps and complete patterns and find patterns. So when we look at this, our brains go, oh, can't make sense of it, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to look for that big reference thing, and I'm going to go to that person, because I don't know what else to do. So it's exhausting for our brains, frankly, for real. We spend a lot of our brain power trying to make sense of the order, and then we're exhausted and can't do the rest of it. And this would apply to your staff as well as to your customers. This is something that you should think about, kind of more broadly. Now this, Clayton and I did not correspond at all, actually. I never met the man until yesterday. But we have the same kind of idea going here, which is distractions and how much is happening at one time and coming at us. This is all this stuff. Have you guys seen one of these before? Every year, somebody comes out with a pie like this that says, every minute on the internet, this is what's happening. So in 2017, every single minute, this is what's going on online. We're inundated constantly. And it's very tempting for us to tap into that. By 2020, there's going to be 50 billion connected devices worldwide. 50 billion people checking out all this stuff. So what is interesting, I think, is we, on average, around the globe, check our phones once every 4.3 minutes. Isn't that crazy? That's kind of sick. 4.3 minutes. And it actually is so bad that a lot of people will check their phones all the way through the night. And I thought that's crazy. That can't be true. But it's actually 1 in 3 people around the world check their phones all night long. And if you're between 18 and 24 years old, you check it 1 in 2, 18 and 24-year-olds check it all night long. We're addicted to our smartphones. We're like the rats in the Skinner box here, pushing that button, because we get a dopamine hit for real. We get happy chemicals coming into us every time we pick up that phone and we see that the score is what we wanted it to be, right, Clayton? For the Aussie Rules game last night, or that somebody liked our photo on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, we get a dopamine hit, and it's actually an addiction. And so we need to break that. But first, just for fun, I have these images from this artist. Does anybody know this artist? Eric Pickersgill is his name. He did this whole series. He calls it Removed. He did a whole series of taking photos of people just in their everyday lives with removing the digital device from their hand to show us how ridiculous it is that we are doing this all the time. And these guys are together at a barbecue, right? You'd think they'd be chatting about the game, maybe. But no, they're looking at the scores themselves probably and not talking to each other about the game. This one is my favorite, right? Unbelievable. These are not staged. He's going around and taking photos. He's getting permission from them, obviously. Or you're out on the water? What? Yes, so we're in a constant state of distraction, and it's affecting our ability to concentrate and to be productive. And there's actually evidence that if you have your phone just in your sightline, it creates a distraction. Just knowing it's there and knowing you could check that Facebook post if you wanted is telling our subconscious mind, you should check it. Check it, you should totally check it. And it's a distraction for us. And so there was another study, I know I'm citing a lot of studies, but this one was at the University of Texas in Austin. that found that cognitive capacity and overall brain power were reduced significantly when a smartphone was within glancing distance, even if it's turned off and face down. If you can see it, even if it's turned off and face down, it's still reducing your brain power. And so they did a test where people had their smartphone in their pocket or in their bag, and they did a test where people had it next to them, and the people who had it in their pocket or bag did better. Go figure. So what can you guys do? You can provide digital-free zones. Tulsa Library has the campfire room, which is this little curtain that comes around you, and there's no technology allowed in the campfire room. And when you're in there, you're meant to be focused on each other, building community, right? Having everyday conversations. And so this is one idea for you. Another is other kinds of distractions. That once our focus is interrupted, did you know it takes us 23 minutes to get back to where we were to be as productive as we were before we were interrupted? That's why it's so frustrating when you're interrupted all day long, because you're like, oh my God, I just lost another 23 minutes. You don't know that maybe, but yes, it's pretty ridiculous. So zoning your library so that you have places that are meant for heads down concentration and people know that that's where you go and you're not to be interrupted, or in your own offices, in your workrooms, having that for your staff, that's super important. I'm gonna maybe skip past this other than to say, breaking news, look it up. We can't multitask. Only 2% of the human population can multitask for real, so I'm gonna skip past it though and talk about how this was about, oops. Hey, that's Norma at Doc 1, who guides meditation for them, which is pretty amazing. So this was about focus and recentering, but I need to keep moving here. So, all right, to close. Getting back in tune with what makes us human makes designing for well-being seem like common sense, right? But it's really important, and it doesn't really happen very much right now. So it really is just about being mindful, thinking about what it is that makes us human and how our spaces can support us and foster community and be inclusive, offer places for people to focus, and a little bit of respite, connect to nature, go out and take a walk after the wine, not before the wine. Or maybe take the wine outside and go for a walk, and get moving a little bit more. The library has been asked to do so many things, I understand this, and I'm gonna ask you to do one more, and that's spread the word about designing for well-being and just even paying attention to our own well-being. You guys are connected to so many people. You've got the influencers in your community, you've got the future influencers of your community, your staff, everybody is coming to you, and you're connected to this huge web. So the more people you talk to about well-being, the further along we will get there. And in closing, buildings, they can certainly run like efficient machines, but we shouldn't feel like we're inside a machine. So that's all. Thank you.
That was very, very inspirational. I even forgive you for the HokeyPokey. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would like to ask Traci some questions. We've saved some time for the end before we have our panel session. So questions for Traci on her suggestions for design.
All questioned out.
Questions.
Well, I have a question. There's a question. No. Good. Well done.
Can you give any suggestions? We've got one of those lovely cubicle buildings. Can you give any suggestions for retrofitting when you haven't got any windows, how to get that diffuse light that might allow us to concentrate and feel better?
Yeah, so a lot of those buildings have really good bones for all the lack of daylight and the other deficiencies that I'm sure you deal with on every day. But a lot of them have amazing structure and really good bones that make for bouncing light off of them very nice, and it gives you that same diffuse kind of effect. The other thing that I would say is task lighting is really key, because if you think about it, every single thing that we do in a building has a different need in terms of light, but the way that we've treated buildings in the past is just to flood them with kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's really not appropriate. So as best you can, provide the right lighting for the task. So if you're seated reading, you have a reading kind of level of light, etc. And those are things that can be done in any building, really. Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to ask you is how these spaces are amazing, but it's the complexity of spaces in libraries where you need some that encourage quiet, some that encourage noise, some that bring people together, and others that are suggesting solitude. It's complex.
It's a lot to balance, and we talked about this in the workshop a bit yesterday, because I was showing, I rightly so got a little bit of feedback about, you're showing all these big libraries where they have room to do all these different zones. What about my building where I've got, 500 square meters? Where is she here? Somebody was telling me, very small, and I don't have space to divide all these spaces up like you're talking. And so I think what's important, and Sergio actually talked about this a little bit as well, is being flexible about how you use your space and mindful about the fixtures that you put in it, or the other kind of aspects that allow you to change it from day to day and throughout the day. But also helping your customers understand that that's the intent, that there's a space here that's serving a wide variety of people with a wide variety of needs. Everybody's coming here for a different reason. They all have their own agenda, and we all have to share this space together. So when you do have the space to be able to have the different zones, that's terrific. But when you don't, I think it makes you need to be a little more creative and flexible with how you use it. That is where you're headed with this? Yep. Back in the back. Yes, hello.
Run, John, like you've never run before.
Right.
Hi, Tracy. I love all this stuff. It's fantastic.
Good.
But I'm wondering, do you
Yes.
have any papers that you've published on this that we can, access and read more about it? Because I think the concepts are really, really important, and I, for one, would really love to know more about all of this.
Yeah, thank you. So not a formal paper about well-being just yet, although I've been working on one, and this has helped me kind of sharpen my focus, so thank you for that. I do have an article. Do you guys get Library Journal at all here online? Yeah. So they ask me occasionally to write an article, and they asked me this summer to write one about, specifically, I had just in passing to the editor said something about, we should make using stairs fun. Blah, blah, blah. And she said, you need to write an article about making stairs fun. And I sat down to write the article, and I thought, this is too narrow. How much more can I say about stairs? Volkswagen did a cool one, and so I broadened it to just getting people out moving a little bit more. So that's coming out this fall. But I do have other things like the healthy lighting and such. I'll pull those all together for you, how about, for the conference organizers, and get them in a little package. And yeah. Yes, good. John?
Okay. Quite often capital works are not easy budgets to get. So if you had to do 3 things for a library to make it more livable, what would you do? With almost no money.
Oh, boy, tie my hands. Okay, so the question, because I think your microphone wasn't quite working, or it was hard for me to hear, but the question I
need to
think
speak
was,
louder.
there you go. The question was, what 3 things would you do if you don't have a lot of money, right, to try and connect people and have this well-being? And I think one would be that access to nature somehow, whether it's through, it could be just through potted plants. Seriously, if you don't have any money, if you've got windows, make sure that you're clearing the things away from the barriers to getting to the windows away so that people can get up close to them and use them. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I think, would have to do with lighting. So critical to how we experience a building, but also our health. I can't say it too many times, I think. The kind of just flooded buildings is really hurting our eyes. It's not good for us. And so that would be the second one. The third would be to try and find ways to get people to want to be at your library. So to hang out together, to be social. So that could be seriously beer. It could be really well-designed spaces that are comfortable to be in. It could be that connection to daylight. It could be an outdoor space, some way that makes your building really wonderful destination for people to want to be. Nobody else. Somebody else. Right over here. Way over here.
Thank you. If you're looking to contract an architect, if you're redesigning a space, how do we attract people like yourself that are talking about this type of design?
Do you have a request for proposal process here that you go through? Yeah. So the way that it's written has a lot to do with who you'll attract. So that's one thing. If you write, it was kind of like Patty talking about strategic plans and the language that you use. If you're just saying, we're going to serve everybody the best we can, a lot of the higher caliber designers and architects would be like, yeah, okay, that's great. That doesn't sound very aspirational, maybe. But if you're saying that we want to provide the healthiest, most innovative library that we can for our city, you're going to attract higher caliber people because everybody wants to be associated with something that's great. And then the other piece of that is there's wonderful networks out there of architects and designers who are keen to work with people who want to do great things, and they find you usually too. And now I found you, right? No, but in all seriousness, there are really great networks, and you can kind of tell through the trade publications and through who gets published online who the higher caliber, more talented designers are. Yeah. That was a nice question. Oh, good.
Traci, thank you very, very much for that. It was a great presentation, very, very important as we start thinking about our libraries. There's been a lot of conversation about libraries as places and spaces, and I know all of us are really looking to try and create havens for our community and attract them and make them want to stay. I thank you very much for your generosity, and